arguably the worst division in the National Football League over the past few seasons has had to be the AFC South. You had a few years where it was really the Indianapolis Colts, and then you sprinkle in the Houston Texans, and the Jaguars and the Titans are sucking hind tit. They're rear naked, butt naked last or next to last. There's been a huge gulf division. It just hasn't been very good, and it's not typically very good football to watch. But there's reason for excitement about the future of the AFC South. And I have to confess, at this moment in time, there's no division that intrigues me more about the potential of the possibility for the future like the AFC South does. You have 4 teams that all would appear in theory to have their young quarterback of the future in place potentially for the next several years to come. The Colts with Andrew Luck, the Jaguars with Blake Bortles, the Tennessee Titans with Marcus Mariota, and even the Houston Texans with the free agent signing of Brock Osweiler, who is all of 26 years of age. So you have 4 younger quarterbacks in their early mid-20s that have yet to even reach the peak of their NFL careers. While this division has been bad the past several seasons, I don't anticipate it to continue to be as such. In fact, like I said, I think this is an incredibly intriguing division, especially when you look at the potential for the offensive upside, especially out of teams like the Jaguars and the Colts, maybe even the Texans and the Titans. This is a division to watch for the future. It really, truly is. And I'm excited about the possibilities for it. So I was really intrigued about what each of these 4 teams were going to do in the 2016 NFL Draft, because to me this was going to be a pivotal moment, frankly, for all 4 of these franchises. All 4 of them needed to get certain things accomplished. All 4 of them needed to have a certain philosophy in place. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the course of time. I guess only time will tell. So you can check out in the description box below each team's picks, my best and worst picks for each team, their overall grades, all of that in the description box below. So let me go ahead and talk about the performances of each team in this division from the worst to the best. I'm going to start with the worst, and to me it has to be the Tennessee Titans. I know that it's easy to fall in love with the teams that do a lot of maneuvering within the NFL Draft, similar to what people will say about the Cleveland Browns. I know it's easy to think about, in particular, those teams that trade down, accumulate a lot of picks for this draft and future drafts, and automatically assume that they're big winners. Well, to me, there are a couple of problems with that. Number one, sometimes you could sit there and put yourself out of a position to do what you really need to do, in particular in round number 1. Number 2, even with all of these picks, you still have to do a good job of execution. And for me, the execution for the Tennessee Titans in this draft was lacking in several areas. And in fact, I gave them the worst grade out of anybody in the 2016 NFL Draft. I just was not impressed. I just did not like what they did. Now, granted, I think the reality will be is that this draft class will outperform the grade, but that still doesn't make it a very good draft. Let's take a look at what happens. You've got a team sitting there at the number 1 overall pick. They've already got their quarterback, so they don't need to take Goff or Wentz. So it makes sense in theory for them to trade down. It really does. They got a big King's Ransom type of package to move all the way down from 1 to 15. You know, and that's kind of one of those deals. You get a package you feel is too good to pass up on, you take it, and then maybe worry about trading back up into the top 10 later. What I don't understand is the Tennessee Titans do just that. They trade back up into the top 10, where a guy in Laremy Tunsil, who at one point in time had to be in consideration to be the number 1 overall pick, is sitting on the board, and you peel up from 15 to 8. 15 to 8. Giving up a 3rd rounder this year and a 2nd rounder next year to go get, for all intents and purposes, either a right tackle or a left guard at the NFL level in Jack Conklin. You just don't do that. I understand there might be a thought process that Taylor Lewan is already the franchise guy. I get that. I understand that they think that he's going to be that blindside protector left tackle for the next several years. Maybe he will be. Maybe he won't be. But to me, in the NFL Draft, as much as anything else, you're trying to take best player available. You're trying to take the best possible talents, and you figure out where to fit them in. Laremy Tunsil was a far superior talent on the board to Jack Conklin. Jack Conklin was nowhere close. I don't anticipate him being a bust, but this is ridiculous taking a guy like this in the top 10. It just absolutely is. Just Absolutely is. A complete brain fart, in my opinion, by this Tennessee Titans front office. And in general, as you look at the entirety of what they were trying to do, where I complained about the Cleveland Browns in terms of their draft philosophy, I didn't really get they were establishing any type of identity. And to me, when you have a new regime, new front office, new coaching staff, you want to, as much as anything else, create an identity. I can at least say for the most part, the Tennessee Titans clearly went about trying to establish some type of identity. Is we're going to be bigger and stronger than you, and we're going to beat the hell out of you. Now that's great if this is the 1980s. Unfortunately, this is the mid-2010s. You need guys with speed and quickness and athleticism. Strength and power is nice. You need to have a physical edge to your game. There's no question about it. But give me the athletes. Give me the guys that can move. Those are the guys that you're more likely to win with in today's NFL. And you're talking about a guy like Jack Conklin. And then, in round 2, I like the pick of Kevin Dodd. But at this point in time, again, I've talked about it with other teams. You're in a position there at the beginning of round number 2. 2 future potential Pro Bowl talents, and Myles Jack and Jalen Smith are on the board. You must, at that point in time, if you are the Tennessee Titans, with all the plethora of picks that you have, similar to the Cleveland Browns, take that second rounder and gamble on one of those 2 guys. That's ridiculous that they did. Look, I think Kevin Dodd could be a nice pass rusher in the 3-4. I think he fits as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But I'm not taking Kevin Dodd over Jalen Smith, or in particular Myles Jack. This was just astoundingly stupid to me. You have these 2 bona fide studs on the board, sure, with durability and knee concerns, but god damn it, you've put yourself in a position where you can take that risk, and you can take that gamble, and you can really, really set yourself up well for years to come, and you dropped the ball. I also thought the Tennessee Titans dropped the ball by being one of those teams. They had moved up from 15 to 8 after trading back from 1 to 15. This was a draft where I felt they needed to trade back up into the first round once, if not potentially twice. They needed impact talent on both sides of the ball. And I just don't see where they got that. And they were in a position where they could have potentially enticed a team to trade back to the early portion of round 2 to be able to go up and get a guy here at the tail end portion of round number 1, to maybe where the Chiefs were picking at number 28. Didn't have to be a dramatic move, but what that affords you is that extra year of player control on their rookie contract. Because first round picks you can have up to 5 years, 2nd through 7th round, it's 4 years, baby, no matter what. So why not, even if you valued Kevin Dodd at this point in time, why not trade it back up into round 1, the last couple of picks, and get that guy potentially for a 5th year? I don't understand it. You had these 3 second-round picks. You could sit there and say, well, they got 3 second-round picks. It maybe wasn't the best deployment of their resources. That's my biggest issue with this. At that point in time, when they traded down to 1 to 15, to me, look at the way the draft was break down, if you're going to trade back up into the top 10, you take Laremy Tunsil. Period. End of discussion. Otherwise, you stay put at 15, let somebody else take Jack Conklin, and then you take Taylor Decker. Just take Taylor Decker at 15. He probably would have been there. And ultimately, he was there for the Lions at 16. I think if you're the Tennessee Titans, you would rather have that extra 3rd round pick and that 2nd round pick next year that you gave up long term. That's just me. Would you rather have Jack Conklin or Taylor Decker and a 3rd rounder in 16 and a 2nd rounder in 17? I think is a pretty easy decision to make. Or would you rather have Jack Conklin or Laremy Tunsil? Child, please. And when you look at the rest of the draft, again, talking about this bigger and stronger, but not necessarily faster mentality, that was just an outdated approach, and I don't really like what they did. I kind of like Austin Johnson here, but there were better players on the board. Derrick Henry, I know a lot of people are really crapping on the pick, especially since they traded for DeMarco Murray. Is DeMarco Murray really going to be a long-term answer? With that said, I thought based off of the offense that they ran, somebody like a C.J. Prosise from Notre Dame would have been a much better schematic fit. And frankly, from the Tennessee Titans standpoint, with all the picks you had, even heading into day 3, there were running backs to be had. How much better does this team look, let's say, if they took a Jonathan Bullard where they took Derrick Henry, and then in round 5, instead of taking a Tajay Sharp, they take somebody like a Paul Perkins or a Jordan Howard. Imagine how better this draft looks. I just thought this was a large miss by the Tennessee Titans. I second-guessed them trading up and then getting Jack Conklin instead of Laremy Tunsil, or just not staying put at 15 and taking Taylor Decker and still keeping that extra 3rd rounder this year and the 2nd rounder next year. I questioned them not trading up once, if not twice, back into round 1 when I felt they clearly needed to. I severely questioned the logic behind sitting there, you're at the beginning of round number 2, both Jalen Smith and Myles Jack are on the board, and you don't gamble on either one of them. Just, I thought, an overall miss here, and that's why I thought they earned the D- grade that I gave them. In terms of the Houston Texans, I thought this was an average grade. I thought the draft was sensible. I don't think it was spectacular. I understand the fit of Will Fuller, and I like the fit opposite DeAndre Hopkins, but the fact is, to me, there were just better wide receivers on the board. And this is where sometimes we can worry a little too much about complementary football and not worry enough about getting the best possible players. I mean, you could sit there and say, hey, I've got DeAndre Hopkins on one side. He can do a lot of things, but a burner he's not. A great stretcher of the field he is not. So I want this guy that can go vertical on the opposite side. Does it really matter? I'll give you the hypothetical scenario. If you're sitting there, and let's say as an organization you already have Chris Carter, do you pass on a Michael Ervin in the draft because you already have a Chris Carter? It's just an example I'm giving you. Just think about that for a second. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Two studs, two eventual Hall of Famers, similar type of players though. Would you pass up on the one because you already had the other? No. I think that's fucking ridiculous. And I think it was ridiculous that the Houston Texans decided on the complimentary part as opposed to taking the superior wide receiver prospect in Doxson and, yes, even Laquan Treadwell, both better players to me. I have real concerns about speedy wide receivers that can't catch. Now, granted, it was the one thing I said about Odell Beckham Jr. heading into the 2014 draft. I said if this guy works on his hands and gets his hands better, he'll be hands down the best wide receiver out of that class and it won't be close. Now, I don't know that Will Fuller has that level of explosiveness and that level of ability. He could pan out here. I just wouldn't have been my choice if I was the Houston Texans. I thought the pick of Nick Martin in round 2 was solid. Braxton Miller in round 3, that's good value for him at that point in time. He's a bit of a project, but he's a gadget guy you could do different things with. It was an okay draft, but again, it was nothing stellar. I was surprised that when they did take a running back in the 4th round, they took Tyler Ervin. I was particularly really surprised with the emphasis they placed on the offensive side of the ball that needed to be, and in particular the skill positions. 3 of the first 4 picks were on skill position players that they didn't bother with the tight end position at all. Granted, it was not a great draft, but, you know, you look at round 5, maybe you could have spent one of those 5th round picks on somebody like a Jarrell Adams. I'm just saying. The Indianapolis Colts. This is very much, in a lot of ways, kind of a meat and potatoes type of draft. Which for them, this is not the type of draft that's going to get them sexy grades and people thinking of them as big winners. But it was exactly the type of draft they needed to have. Pick 18, Ryan Kelly, Alabama. You want Andrew Luck to be your Peyton Manning, you need to go get him his Jeff Saturday. Ryan Kelly should be that Jeff Saturday type. I'll be stunned if he's not a multiple-time Pro Bowler at the NFL level. And even though, yes, he's a center, and yes, they took him in the top 20, if you can find a guy that could be a Pro Bowl-level player for 8, 10, 12 years to protect your franchise quarterback for that entire period of time, you take him 100 out of 100 times. This is an example of not getting cute, not trying to outflank or outthink yourself. Just make the smart, sensible pick, and that's what they did here. Then you could afford to gamble in round number 2 on a guy with high athletic upside like a TJ Green, from Clemson. Is he going to play corner? Is he going to be a safety? You know, maybe a safety, maybe a corner, yet to be determined. You know, at that point in time, they needed help in that area on their defense, so the pick made sense, even if Colts fans aren't huge on it. Then you invest more in the trenches. LaRaven Clark in round 3, Joe Haeg in round number 5. On the defensive side of the ball, Hassan Ridgeway in round number 4. And since it's a 3-4, I kind of classify inside linebackers as being a part of the trenches too. I love the pick of Antonio Morrison from Florida. This is a guy that plays with an edge. That came off a major knee injury and played like he didn't really skip a beat to me in 2015. I thought he was really, really underrated in a lot of ways. They invested 4 total picks in their offensive line. If you throw in the 7th round pick, Austin Blythe, the center from Iowa, you know, this was the type of draft they needed. They had to prioritize protecting Andrew Luck. They had to prioritize that, and they did just that. Now, Ryan Kelly is a day 1 plug-and-play starter. You know, could Haeg be a starter someday? I think so. Could Clark be a starter someday? I think so. So, in this draft, they got 3 potential starting offensive linemen. We'll see what happens with TJ Green and Hassan Ridgeway. Ridgeway could potentially be a steal in round number 4. It's a C-plus grade, but I don't mean that as any type of slight on the Indianapolis Colts. It just is what it is. You know, maybe I would have taken somebody else in round 2, but that's who they took. Maybe I would have taken somebody else other than Ridgeway in round number 4. But that's who they took, and it made sense. But like I said, this was a nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes type of draft, which is exactly the type of draft the Indianapolis Colts needed to have. But to me, the clear runaway winner here has to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're the only team out of all 32 teams in the NFL that I gave an A grade for the 2016 NFL draft. I just thought they really hit this out of the park. And when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars draft, this is going to be the ultimate put up or shut up time. There's no more excuses, no more kicking the bucket down the road, no more saying, it takes time, ... skip-de skip, whoop-de-whoop. This is the draft right here that either A, should win the Jacksonville Jaguars the division as early as 2016, or should see Gus Bradley fired at the end of 2016. It's that simple. When you go into a draft and you're potentially considering 2 guys at the 5th overall pick in Jalen Ramsey and Myles Jack, hoping one or both of them is there, hoping maybe even both of them are there on one hand so you could sit there and have your choice, or at least one of them is there and in part the choice was made for you. Not only were you able to get one of those guys, you were able to come back at the early portion of round 2 and get the other guy. I mean, they got Jalen Ramsey in round number 1 and Myles Jack in round number 2. This is the type of shit that reeks of legendary draft, and I'm not blowing smoke here. If you think about this, 2 guys that a lot of people view as Pro Bowl potential all-pro type of talents. This is the Ogden Lewis type of draft situation, the Sack Brooks type of draft situation. It's very rare that you can get 2 types of talents like this in the first 2 rounds of the draft, and one of them in the top 5 and the other one in the 2nd round, for Christ's sakes. I know there's concerns about Myles Jack knee and everything else. There's concerns about Jalen Ramsey and how he'll transition to corner. And I have some concerns too, especially playing in a division where he might have to potentially go up against guys like T.Y. Hilton and Kendall Wright and Will Fuller, smaller, kind of quicker twitch guys. At the end of the day, the Jaguars wanted to run that Seahawks system, and for years they've been trying to run the system with the X's and O's, with not having nearly enough Jimmys and Joes to get the job done. They needed a serious infusion of talent on the defensive side of the ball. They needed guys that could make plays. They needed speed, they needed athleticism, they needed pass rushers, and to me, they got all of that in this draft. Jalen Ramsey could be the Richard Sherman type. Myles Jack, their Bobby Wagner type. You look at Yannick Ngakoue in the 3rd round out of Maryland. I love this kid. I think he's criminally been underrated throughout the entire draft process. You get him here in round 3, maybe he's a situational pass rusher for you, but maybe he becomes a Bruce Ervin type. Maybe you could play him on the strong side. Sheldon Day in round number 4, a rotational, if nothing else, interior pass rusher. The 6th round, Tyrone Holmes from Montana was a good value pick as well, another potential situational pass rusher. So you look at their first 5 picks, all of them on the defensive side of the ball, which is where they needed to be. They finally got that big-time corner they've been needing. They got that big-time middle linebacker, and they got some situational pass rushers on their front 4. It doesn't get much better than this. So when you look at the Jaguars, there are no more excuses. You should have Dante Fowler coming back from the ACL injury ready to play in 2016. You look at that, you could consider that like a first-round pick bonus this year, potentially. The guy they took 3rd overall last year hasn't played yet, but he's about to. So you look at this and you say, man, this is a coup for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and this is a team right here that should be going places. And you're right, they should. And if they don't, there's something seriously wrong with it. To me, when you look at the Jaguars and what happened here, this, in theory, should be a draft that we point to 20 years from now and talk about how it was the big franchise changer for the Jacksonville Jaguars and it helped them win a Super Bowl one of these days.